On the night of October 30th, 1975, known as Mischief Night, the air in the elite neighborhood of Belle Haven, Greenwich, Connecticut, was filled with both excitement and tension in anticipation of Halloween. Belle Haven, a secluded and heavily guarded community, was home to some of the wealthiest and most influential families in the United States. The luxurious homes with modern colonial architecture lined the winding streets, which were covered in autumn leaves. In their vast yards, the Halloween decorations were grander than in previous years. Giant pumpkins, intricately carved, glowing orange lights, and expensive animated skeleton or ghost displays adorned every corner of the properties. Large trees that once provided shade in the summer had shed most of their leaves, leaving bare branches that looked eerie under the moonlight. However, behind the grandeur, Mischief Night carried a darker, more mischievous side. It became an opportunity for children and teenagers in the area to release their energy through various pranks. Outside the tightly guarded gates of Belle Haven, young people roamed with rolls of toilet paper, ready to drape the trees in their neighbors' yards with white strands hanging from the branches. There was also a bolder and naughtier group of teenagers who smashed the large pumpkins that decorated the porches of the luxury homes. Some even snuck into yards and set off firecrackers in the middle of the quiet roads, with the sounds echoing off the large buildings lining Belle Haven. In Belle Haven, such pranks might have seemed harmless, just a part of an annual tradition that most people found amusing. Almost all the children and teenagers enjoyed Mischief Night, the night before Halloween. But this wasn't the case for the Moxley family, whose world fell apart on what should have been a joyful night. Martha Elizabeth Moxley, born on August 30th, 1960, was the youngest of two siblings. Her father, David Moxley, was a successful executive, a prominent accountant working for an international firm with major clients, while her mother, Dorothy Moxley, was a loving housewife who was always involved in the social life of their community. The family originally lived in Piedmont, California, in a comfortable home surrounded by a high-class lifestyle filled with privacy and exclusivity. However, when Martha was 14 years old, they decided to move to Belle Haven, a more exclusive and secure neighborhood in Greenwich, Connecticut. Belle Haven's tight security and reputation as a residence for business tycoons made it seem like the ideal place to build an even better family life. Belle Haven was the perfect neighborhood for wealthy and prominent families like the Moxleys. Their home stood grandly, surrounded by a large yard with beautiful maple trees. Everything seemed perfect, especially with Martha, the youngest, excelling in everything she did. Her older brother John described Martha as almost perfect, and it wasn't without reason. Martha was a smart child with outstanding academic achievements, making her the pride of the family. At school, she was known not only for her academic success, but also for her athletic talents. Basketball was her favorite sport, and even though she was only 15, many predicted she would become a successful athlete. In addition, Martha was active in art and social activities at school, making her very popular among her friends. Martha's beauty wasn't just in her achievements and talents, but also in her warm and approachable personality. She had a wide smile that always brightened her face, making her liked by everyone who knew her. Many described Martha as a friendly and pleasant girl with a natural ability to make others feel comfortable around her. Her friends admired how attentively she spoke, while her teachers appreciated her discipline and dedication. In the social circles of Belle Haven, filled with wealthy and famous families, Martha shone as an attractive figure, both in personality and accomplishments. However, behind all her cheerfulness and popularity, Martha also had a rebellious teenage side that often led to disagreements with her parents. As the youngest child, she often felt freer and sometimes took risks without fully thinking them through. She wasn't a troublemaker, but at times she got involved in small acts that earned her scolding from her parents. Behind her innocent smile, Martha could be mischievous, like when she broke curfew or argued with her parents about her freedom to hang out with friends. Despite this, her rebellious side was never taken too seriously by those around her. Martha was simply a teenager enjoying her youth, like many other kids her age. On Mischief Night in 1975, the air in Belle Haven was cold and crisp, filled with the sounds of children laughing as they ran around, throwing toilet paper over trees and smashing pumpkins left on front porches. Martha Moxley, who had been grounded for bad behavior a few days earlier, kept begging her mother Dorothy to let her go out and play with her friends. Reluctantly, Dorothy agreed, but only on the condition that Martha stay nearby and not stay out too long. As the night wore on and the excitement of Mischief Night began to fade, Martha and some of her friends decided to stop by the Skakel family's mansion at the end of the street. It was there that Martha hoped to meet Thomas Skakel, a 17-year-old boy she was dating. Thomas, his younger brother Michael, and Martha, along with other kids in the neighborhood, often hung out together. Martha kept a diary where she recorded all her activities with her friends. Thomas Skakel and Michael Skakel, 15, were two of the 6 children of Rushton and Anne Skakel. Anne Skakel was the sister of Ethel Skakel, the wife of Robert F. Kennedy, brother of John F. Kennedy, the former president of the United States. This connection to the Kennedy family made the Skakels well known in the Belle Haven community. After the death of their mother, Anne Skakel, in 1973 from brain cancer, the family completely lost its direction. Their father, Rushton Skakel, who had long struggled with alcoholism, sank deeper into his addiction, losing control over the household. He was rarely seen caring for or disciplining his children, often disappearing into drinking parties or isolating himself behind the closed doors of his office. The heavy burden of managing the household fell to the house staff, who frequently came and went, unable to last long in the face of the children's unruly behavior and the chaotic atmosphere at home. Among the 6 siblings, Thomas and Michael often drew the most attention and were frequently involved in trouble. Thomas Skakel had a reputation for being arrogant and manipulative. Though he was known as Martha Moxley's boyfriend, his relationship with her was unclear and filled with uncertainty. He was often aggressive and liked to flaunt his power as a member of an influential family. Thomas was also involved in the typical mischief of wealthy teenagers who felt immune to consequences, from reckless driving around the neighborhood to insulting and humiliating the household staff, whom he never respected. However, Michael Skakel was the one who became the most troubled child. Losing his mother at such a young age seemed to affect Michael more deeply than his other siblings. He was known to be more emotional, easily angered, and unpredictable. After his mother's death, he began showing worrying behavior. Michael often stole alcohol from his father's liquor cabinet and drank excessively for someone his age. This habit wasn't just youthful rebellion, but an early sign of alcoholism that, like his father, began to take over his life. It wasn't uncommon to find Michael drunk, even at a very young age. Alcohol appeared to be his escape from grief, which he couldn't express with words. Michael also had frequent emotional outbursts, regardless of the consequences. There were stories of him threatening some of his schoolmates in fits of anger, or even getting involved in physical fights over trivial matters. What should have been a teenage life filled with joy and self-discovery turned into a whirlwind of unmanaged emotions for Michael. Wild parties, drag racing around Belle Haven, and minor acts of vandalism became part of Michael and his siblings' daily routine. They often pushed boundaries without regard for rules or authority. When the Belle Haven police or school authorities tried to reprimand or sanction them for their actions, the Skakel name, closely linked to the Kennedy family, often allowed them to escape serious consequences. The Skakel family had already been involved in several embarrassing incidents that worsened their reputation in Belle Haven. though the Kennedy connection often shielded them from broader media attention. One notable case was when Michael and his siblings were caught driving under the influence of alcohol around Belle Haven, resulting in a minor accident. However, thanks to their family connections, the incident was covered up without significant consequences. Similarly, fights at school and property damage caused by the Skakel brothers were consistently overlooked due to their high social standing. The loss of Anne Skakel made the Skakel household even more uncontrollable. Rushton Skakel, who had once been a father with at least some level of authority, had now completely surrendered to his alcohol addiction, leaving his children without any guidance. This situation created the perfect environment for a chaotic family dynamic, filled with unruly behavior and hidden emotional turmoil behind their family's powerful name. The closeness between Martha and Thomas inevitably sparked intense jealousy in Michael Skakel. In the Skakel family, sibling relationships were never harmonious, and the rivalry between Thomas and Michael had long been a part of their daily lives. Whether it was about sports achievements, attention from their father, or even a simple game, Thomas and Michael were always competing to come out on top. Their competition over Martha only added fuel to the fire that had been burning for years. From the beginning, Michael felt something special about Martha. Her bright smile, her carefree laugh, and the way she spoke all fascinated him. He wanted to be closer to her, more than just friends. But Thomas, with his more mature teenage charisma and confident attitude, noticed this. As the older brother, Thomas often used his position to outshine Michael, and in this case, Martha became a pawn in their complicated game. Thomas, aware of his younger brother's feelings, quickly decided to get closer to Martha, not because he truly liked her, but to toy with Michael. For Thomas, this wasn't just about Martha. It was about having power over his brother and proving who was in control. Using his cunning and manipulative nature, Thomas gradually won Martha's heart, charming her in a way he only did when it suited him. Martha, likely unaware of the rivalry between the two brothers, was flattered by Thomas's attention. For Michael, watching his brother start a relationship with the girl he liked felt like a defeat, not just from Thomas, but from fate itself. Every time he saw Martha laughing with Thomas or walking together around Belle Haven, his heart was filled with a mix of anger and sadness. What had once been a rivalry over skills and achievements had now transformed into an emotional battle, with Martha at the center of an unspoken conflict. The last time Martha was seen was on the night of October 30th, 1975, in the midst of the lively Mischief Night, filled with teenage pranks and laughter that echoed through the air in Belle Haven. Sheila, Martha's closest friend, said the last time she saw Martha, she was with Thomas Skakel. They were in the backyard of the Skakel family's home, near the large, dark pool, where the dim light from the grand house only illuminated a small part of the still water. According to Sheila, Martha and Thomas appeared to be embracing, lost in an intimate moment, whispering to each other, far from the noise of the streets that night. Sheila watched them until around 9:30 p.m., before deciding to head home, leaving Martha and Thomas still there. As time passed, what should have been a simple night out with friends turned into a nightmare. At 2 a.m., Martha's mother, Dorothy, started to feel uneasy. Anxiety crept into her mind as the clock continued to tick. Where was Martha? The question lingered in the air. Martha usually never stayed out this late without informing her parents. After waiting anxiously, Dorothy decided to call Sheila, hoping her daughter's best friend could provide some answers. Sheila's voice was soft but hesitant as she told Dorothy that the last time she saw Martha, she was with Thomas near the pool, just before Sheila left them. With her heart pounding, Dorothy watched the clock, now moving quickly toward dawn. At 3:45 a.m., after waiting without any news, she finally called the police to report Martha missing. Dorothy's voice on the phone was calm, but beneath her words was a growing fear. As the police promised to start searching immediately, Dorothy, exhausted and overwhelmed, eventually fell asleep, though her mind remained filled with thoughts of where Martha could be. At daybreak, Dorothy woke with a heavier feeling than the night before. Martha's room was still empty, and there were no signs that her daughter had returned. The vague worry had now turned into outright terror. By this time, Martha should have been home. With her heart racing, Dorothy called Martha's friends one by one, but none of them knew what had happened after Martha was last seen with Thomas. No longer able to just wait at home, Dorothy decided to go to the Skakel family's house herself, only a few houses away from her own. The morning air was cold and still, making her steps feel even heavier. When she arrived, it was Michael Skakel who answered the door, still looking half asleep. His face appeared pale in the dim morning light. When Dorothy asked about Martha's whereabouts, Michael only shook his head. "She's not here. I don't know where she is," Michael said, his voice flat but carrying an unexplainable tension. Dorothy sensed something was off, but she had no choice but to continue her search. After a brief conversation with Michael, Dorothy went to Jean's house, one of Martha's close friends, who also lived near the Skakels. As Dorothy explained the situation, Jean suggested they have some coffee to calm their nerves while they tried to think clearly about the next steps. As they sat in Jean's living room, slowly sipping their coffee, Sheila suddenly joined them. Her face looked anxious, as if she realized time was running out. After a short discussion, Sheila decided she couldn't just wait any longer. She was going to go out and search for Martha herself, while Dorothy and Jean stayed behind, waiting for any news that could change everything. The tension grew, and every passing minute seemed to add to their heavy emotions, leaving one question lingering in the air: where was Martha? Sheila ran breathlessly down the dark streets of Belle Haven, her heart racing erratically. Every shadow and dark corner felt full of unseen threats. As she approached the Skakel family's pool, the last place she had seen Martha with Thomas, her heart nearly jumped out of her chest. But the pool was empty, the cold water shimmering with an eerie calm. There was no sign of Martha, no sound of the laughter she was used to hearing, only silence, piercing and unsettling. Desperate, Sheila returned to the streets, her legs growing tired, but her mind overwhelmed with fear. She checked every corner, every yard, hoping to find a trace of Martha. As she drew closer to the Moxley home, the chill running down her spine turned into a gripping fear. In the shadows of the towering pine trees in Martha's backyard, she saw something. As Sheila approached, the scene before her was like a nightmare. Martha's body lay face down under the pine tree, almost hidden by the fallen autumn leaves. Her underwear was pulled down to her ankles, and her pants no longer protected her dignity. Blood stained the ground around her, the dark red still fresh, contrasting sharply with Martha's pale skin, now frozen in an unnatural position. Most horrifying of all, a piece of metal was lodged in Martha's neck, appearing to be part of a golf club. Her head was covered in severe injuries, large bruises on the back of her skull telling a grim story of merciless violence. Another broken part of the golf club lay nearby, scattered on the ground like silent evidence of the brutal attack that had just occurred. Sheila couldn't hold back her scream any longer. It escaped, long and piercing, cutting through the still morning air. She immediately ran, her breath growing heavier, her legs trembling. With every ounce of strength left in her, Sheila rushed back to Jean's house, where Dorothy was still waiting, filled with a worry she didn't yet know would soon turn into an unimaginable horror. The door burst open as Sheila arrived, tears streaming down her face uncontrollably. "Martha, she's dead." Her voice barely came out, caught in her throat, but it was enough to shatter Dorothy's world in an instant. The coffee cup in Jean's hand slipped to the floor, breaking into pieces, much like their emotions at that moment. With trembling hands, Dorothy immediately dialed 911. Her face was pale, unable to grasp the reality that her daughter, who had been smiling at her just hours earlier, was now gone. The police arrived quickly, and the Moxley household instantly became a crime scene. Martha lay under the pine tree in her own backyard. But how could this have happened? Blood scattered along the pathway suggested Martha was likely attacked while walking home and chased until she collapsed in the very place that had become her final resting spot. Or had her body been moved from the original crime scene? As news of Martha's body spread, Belle Haven was overcome with fear and tension. The police acted swiftly, and before long, their attention turned to the Skakel family. Both Thomas and Michael were soon placed under scrutiny after it was discovered that the golf club used to kill Martha belonged to their late mother, Anne Skakel. Rushton Skakel, known for his arrogance and influence, quickly arranged a meeting with the authorities, vehemently denying any involvement of his sons in the brutal murder. With an angry and haughty tone, he stated, "Those golf clubs are often left outside by Thomas and Michael. Anyone could have picked them up. This has nothing to do with us." However, the police were not convinced by Rushton's words. The Skakel family's prominent name and their connection to the Kennedy family undoubtedly gave them power. But this time, the situation was different. The golf club wasn't just an ordinary item. It was crucial evidence linking Martha's tragic death to the family. The detectives eyed Rushton sharply, aware that they were not just dealing with a brutal murder, but also with a web of lies, influence, and possible manipulation. Dorothy Moxley stood frozen in her living room, her surroundings blurred by the endless stream of tears. Her world felt shattered before her, as if time had stopped the moment she heard the devastating news. Her daughter Martha, the one who had filled their home with laughter and youthful joy, was gone. The body that had once been warm and full of life was now cold and lifeless. Dorothy's face was pale, her eyes red and swollen, but she could no longer cry. Every emotion had been drained, leaving her in a suffocating emptiness. Every corner of the house, every room felt quiet and unfamiliar, as if the soul that had made it a home was now missing. Martha had been the heart of the Moxley family, and now that heart had stopped beating. David Moxley, Dorothy's husband, sat in the living room chair, his hands covering his face as he struggled to muffle the sound of his restrained sobs. The father, who had always been the pillar of strength for the family, could no longer hold back the overwhelming grief. His mind was flooded with memories of Martha's last moments, the joyful smile she wore as she went out that night, never imagining it would be the last time he would see her alive. David felt powerless, a father who was supposed to protect his daughter, now trapped in guilt that haunted him. How could this have happened? How could his kind and innocent daughter have met such a cruel end? He wanted to scream, to throw anything within reach, but the sadness was too overwhelming, imprisoning his anger in a painful silence. Meanwhile, John Moxley, Martha's older brother, stood in the corner of the room, his body stiff like stone. A sense of disbelief and confusion filled his mind. Martha, his little sister, his childhood playmate, was now gone. How could this be? How could a world that once seemed so peaceful and perfect suddenly turn into one filled with darkness and tragedy? John wanted to run out, to find answers, to find the person who did this to Martha. But right now, his body couldn't move. He felt trapped in an inner turmoil, torn between the desire to scream and the reality he couldn't accept. The home that was once filled with joy had now turned into a sea of sorrow. Every corner of the house felt heavy. Every step felt difficult. Losing Martha wasn't just about losing a daughter or a sister. It was about losing the very essence of the life they had known. No more would they hear Martha's joyful laughter. No more would they see her running around the house with her wide smile. A stifling silence filled the emptiness, leaving behind an indescribable pain. In Dorothy's mind, images of Martha kept appearing. Little Martha, full of energy, playing in the garden. Teenage Martha, sharing stories about her friends. Martha laughing as they joked together. But now, all of that was just a memory. Dorothy's life felt divided, between a past filled with love and a future that looked bleak without Martha in it. How could a mother go on living after losing her child in such a horrific way? Dorothy felt as if half her soul had died with Martha. The Moxley family was not only facing a devastating loss, but they also had to confront the reality that justice for Martha might not come easily. The world outside was no longer the safe and orderly place they once believed it to be. That truth was more painful than anything, that they might have to live with unanswered questions and wounds that would never truly heal. The investigation into Martha Moxley's murder case became increasingly complex and puzzling as time passed. For months, the investigative team worked tirelessly, interviewing hundreds of people, gathering even the smallest pieces of evidence, and using polygraph tests in an attempt to find inconsistencies in the alibis of the suspects. However, as widely known, polygraph results are often not considered reliable evidence in court. Nevertheless, these tests remained a useful tool for investigators to assess the consistency of statements and the emotional reactions of the people they suspected. After a long and detailed process, the police were able to narrow down the list of suspects to 3 individuals. The most prominent name in the investigation was Thomas Skakel, the last person to be seen with Martha that night. Suspicion toward Thomas grew stronger when his alibi began to be questioned. He claimed that he parted ways with Martha at 9:30 p.m. after they spent some time together near the pool in his backyard. Thomas said he saw Martha walking home, which was only a short distance away. Afterward, according to his statement, he spent the rest of the evening watching TV with Kenneth Littleton, a private tutor who had recently started working at the Skakel household. At first, Thomas's alibi seemed solid. Kenneth Littleton even supported his claim, saying that Thomas had joined him to watch TV. However, when investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies in Thomas's alibi began to surface. Sheila, Martha's best friend, complicated Thomas's situation by telling the police that she had seen Martha and Thomas together near the pool around 9:30 p.m. The same time Thomas claimed he saw Martha walking home. If Sheila was correct, Martha could not have been walking home at that time. They were still near the pool. Tension escalated when Kenneth Littleton, the tutor, provided additional details that cast further doubt on Thomas's alibi. In his interview, Littleton mentioned that Thomas did not join him to watch TV until around 10:30 p.m., leaving a gap of 1 hour during which Thomas's whereabouts were unaccounted for. What had Thomas been doing during that hour? This was the question that began to haunt the investigators. An hour might seem brief, but in a murder investigation, it's enough time for many things to happen, and long enough to turn what should have been a mischief night filled with harmless pranks into a dark tragedy. The gap in Thomas's alibi, combined with other undisclosed evidence, such as the position of Martha's body when it was found and the Skakel family's golf club used as the murder weapon, caused authorities to focus more intently on Thomas. However, the deeper they investigated, the more inconsistencies emerged. The big question remained: if Thomas wasn't telling the truth, what really happened during that missing hour? Michael Skakel held the second position on the list of main suspects. His alibi claimed that at the time of the murder, he was at his cousin's house watching a television show. However, there were several issues that cast doubt on this alibi. His cousin could not firmly confirm his presence, creating a significant gap in his testimony. Additionally, several other witnesses reported seeing Michael wandering around the neighborhood on the night of the incident, raising suspicions that he may not have been where he claimed to be. Further investigation revealed that Michael often displayed unstable and temperamental behavior. The fact that the weapon used to attack Martha was a golf club, believed to have come from the Skakel home, further directed suspicion toward Michael, as well as his brother, Thomas. The combination of a weak alibi, inconsistent witnesses, and physical evidence connecting him to the crime scene, made Michael a difficult figure to overlook in this high-profile case. The third suspect was Kenneth Littleton, the Skakel family tutor who had only started working on the day of the murder. Unknown to Rushton Skakel, the head of the Skakel family, Littleton had a criminal record that had been concealed from his employment history, including charges of robbery and a 5-year prison sentence. This fact made him a suspect, although there was no physical evidence directly linking him to the crime. The case became even more complicated with the intervention of Rushton Skakel. Frustrated with the investigation's lack of progress, Rushton, who held significant influence in the small town, began to restrict police access to his family and their property. On January 22, 1976, just 3 months after the murder, he officially refused to cooperate any further with authorities. This caused the investigation to stall, especially since much of the evidence was likely within the Skakel family's estate. Rushton's strong influence over the local police, combined with a community that tended to protect its elite members, caused the case to drag on without significant progress. By the end of 1976, the case had grown quieter. No suspects had been charged, and the Skakel family, with their power, managed to distance themselves from the case for years. The case remained a mystery for over 2 decades before the investigation was reopened, but by then, much of the evidence had been lost or was no longer reliable, slowing down the legal process significantly. It wasn't until 1991 that the murder of Martha Moxley resurfaced after the rape trial of William Kennedy Smith, the nephew of Senator Ted Kennedy. William Kennedy Smith was accused of rape in Florida, and during the trial, various rumors about scandals involving the Kennedy family, including the Skakels, began to circulate. This renewed media attention brought the unsolved Martha Moxley case back into the spotlight, a case that involved the Kennedy family and had remained unresolved for many years. Amid growing public pressure, Rushton Skakel made considerable efforts to suppress speculation linking his family to the murder. He took drastic steps, including hiring a private investigation firm known as Sutton Associates in the early 1990s. The primary goal of this private investigation was to find evidence that could clear the Skakel family of any involvement in the murder. The investigators interviewed family members and witnesses, gathering information that had not previously been revealed. However, instead of absolving the Skakel family from suspicion, the investigation report uncovered even more suspicious details, particularly involving Michael Skakel, who was now an adult. According to the report, Michael had given inconsistent statements about the night of the murder, and several witnesses reported his strange behavior. Although the entire investigative team and those involved in producing the report signed confidentiality agreements, the secrecy did not last long. 5 years later, in 1996, the confidential report was leaked to a journalist by one of the young men involved in its creation. This individual, moved by the injustice felt by Martha's mother, Dorothy Moxley, finally decided to speak out. Driven by empathy for Dorothy, who had fought for years without receiving any answers or justice for her daughter's murder, the young man contacted a local journalist and handed over a complete copy of the private investigation report. The journalist who published the document was Len Levitt, an investigative reporter working on the case. To protect the source, the name of the person who leaked the report remained anonymous. Once the report was made public, the Martha Moxley murder case returned to the national spotlight. Rushton Skakel worked hard to control the damage, but the leak only deepened public suspicion toward Michael and the Skakel family. The young man who leaked the report was later sued by the Skakel family for violating the confidentiality agreement, and he was forced to sign further agreements to prevent additional information from being disclosed. This event became a crucial turning point in the long-dormant investigation. The public began demanding answers, and the case gained renewed attention, pushing the investigation in a new direction and paving the way for further developments. The report, published in 1996, revealed shocking details about the involvement of both Skakel brothers, Thomas and Michael, in the investigation of Martha Moxley's murder. In statements recorded by the private investigators, it was discovered that both brothers had lied to the police about their whereabouts on the night of Martha's murder. Thomas Skakel, who initially claimed to have been watching TV with the family tutor, Kenneth Littleton, at 9:30 p.m. that night, later changed his story. In an interview with investigators, he admitted that he had actually met with Martha outside the house at that time. Thomas stated that he and Martha had engaged in a brief, romantic encounter in the backyard before he returned inside. According to his account, they parted ways around 10 p.m., and he went back inside to watch TV with Kenneth about 20 minutes after their meeting ended. The physical interaction between Thomas and Martha, which Thomas described as sexual activity, raised suspicions, but he continued to deny any involvement in her death. Michael Skakel, who also initially provided a false alibi to the police, had claimed that he was at his cousin's house on the night of the murder. Michael eventually admitted that he was not at his cousin's house at the time. Instead, Michael confessed that he was drunk and wandering around the neighborhood near Martha Moxley's home that night. In a shocking admission, Michael revealed that he had climbed a tree close to where Martha's body was later found. From the tree, he claimed to have peeped into Martha's bedroom and, while intoxicated, masturbated in the tree while imagining Martha sleeping naked. This confession led investigators to conclude that Michael was very close to the crime scene on the night of the murder, and that it was unlikely he did not see Martha's body when he descended from the tree. Investigators also questioned why Michael would be wandering around without being more involved in the tragic event. The fact that he climbed the tree near where Martha's body was discovered the next day only deepened the suspicion surrounding him. Despite Michael's continued denials that he killed Martha, the private investigators hired by the Skakel family clearly identified Michael as the prime suspect in their report. This report reignited the investigation, which had been stalled for years. With the revelation that both Skakel brothers had lied about their alibis, and with Michael's suspicious behavior near the crime scene, public attention once again focused on the case that had remained unresolved for over 2 decades. In June 1998, District Attorney Jonathan Benedict convened a special grand jury to review evidence related to Michael Skakel's involvement in the murder of Martha Moxley, which had occurred more than 20 years earlier. This one-person grand jury was established in response to the reports revealing suspicious admissions from both Michael and his brother Thomas regarding the events of the murder night. After considering the new evidence, Prosecutor Benedict took the significant step of arresting Michael Skakel in January 2000. However, Michael was soon released after posting a $500,000 bail while awaiting what would be a lengthy legal process. Michael's trial did not move quickly. The complex and drawn-out court proceedings finally reached their climax on June 7, 2002, more than 4 years after the case was reopened. On that day, a court in Norwalk, Connecticut, decisively ruled that Michael, who was 42 at the time, was guilty of the murder of Martha Moxley on Halloween night in 1975, when he was just 15 years old. Michael was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. The trial featured testimony from more than 40 witnesses, many of whom were Michael's former classmates from Elon School, an elite reform school he attended between 1978 and 1980. The school was known for housing troubled children from wealthy families, and the testimony of several former students played a key role in convicting Michael. One witness testified that Michael had once told him how he took his mother's golf club from the closet and ran into the woods on the night of Martha's murder. In a particularly emotional moment, the witness quoted Michael as saying, "I don't know if I did it. I don't remember if I did it," he said, clearly referring to the horrific murder. Other testimonies also strengthened the case against Michael. Several witnesses revealed that Michael often boasted about his family's status, still linked to the influential Kennedy clan. One witness even quoted Michael as saying, "I'll get away with this. I'm a Kennedy." Although this arrogant statement did not directly admit guilt, it showed Michael's belief that his family's power and reputation at the top of American society would protect him from legal consequences. These testimonies had a significant impact on the jury and judge, who ultimately decided that Michael must be held accountable for Martha's tragic death. Michael was sent to Garner Correctional Institution in Newtown, Connecticut, marking a new chapter in the life of a man who had grown up in luxury and power, now facing a heavy sentence for a crime that delayed justice for more than 2 decades. However, this victory for the Moxley family was short-lived. Although it took 20 years to bring the case to court and secure justice for Martha, the legal battle was far from over. Various appeals and legal controversies continued to arise in the following years. What had initially seemed like the final resolution of the case once again faced obstacles, making full closure of the tragedy difficult to achieve. After serving 11 years in prison, Michael Skakel returned to court in October 2013 for a case review. In a decision that surprised many, a judge granted Michael's release on parole after he posted a $1.2 million bail. The primary reason for his release was that his previous attorney had been found to have provided inadequate defense during the 2002 trial. The attorney was allegedly more focused on handling media attention than defending his client, raising ethical issues that affected the outcome of the trial. Following his release, Michael Skakel moved to New York and rejoined his family. Despite his freedom, the shadow of Martha Moxley's murder continued to haunt him. On May 4, 2018, the Connecticut Supreme Court made a dramatic decision, overturning Michael Skakel's conviction. This decision came after years of lengthy legal proceedings and numerous appeals by his legal team. On October 30, 2020, exactly 45 years after the terrible night that claimed Martha's life, the final surprise came. Prosecutors announced that they would not refile the case against Michael. The main reasons were the deaths of key witnesses and their inability to testify, as well as the lack of new evidence since the last trial. This officially closed the case, with Michael Skakel cleared of the murder charges that had hung over him for years. This story, spanning nearly half a century, ends with questions that may never be fully answered. The Moxley family, especially Martha's mother, Dorothy Moxley, fought tirelessly for years in pursuit of justice for her daughter. However, despite once succeeding in sending Michael to prison, the final court decision left a sense of bitterness and disappointment for those who had hoped the full truth would finally come to light. In the end, Martha Moxley's story serves as a reminder that crimes can happen anywhere, even in the safest of communities. And as we look back on this long journey, we are reminded of the importance of continuing to fight for truth and justice, even when the challenges seem insurmountable.